I had purchased the farm about 2 years ago at a remarkably low price. When I inquired about why the cost was so minimal, the real estate agent hedged and merely shrugged and offered vague, unsettling explanations. Rumors swirled that the previous owner had met a grim fate, his wife disappearing under mysterious circumstances, the whole thing shrouded in mystery. Some locals claimed to have seen a spectral figure drifting from the house towards the old well, only to vanish after a few moments. Despite many investigations, nothing concrete ever came of it, leaving the rumors to fester and multiply. The farm itself was a sprawling piece of land, a relic of a bygone era with its creaking wooden barn and overgrown fields. The house, though modest, had an eerie charm that belied the dark tales surrounding it. For the most part, I found solace in its isolation, a welcome escape from the bustle of city life. But tonight, as I sat on the porch, savoring the cool summer evening, sipping on iced tea, I was about to confront the very essence of the farm's unnerving legacy. I leaned back in my rocking chair, the creak of the old wood a comforting backdrop to the silence of the night. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the first stars were emerging, casting a faint, ethereal glow over the land. A gentle breeze rustled the tall grass in the field, creating whispers that seemed to carry secrets of their own. As I sat there sipping my drink, something near the edge of the field caught my eye. At first, it was nothing more than a trick of the light or a shadow playing games with my tired eyes. But as I focused more intently, the shape began to coalesce into something more defined. Yet still, and possibly shifting, it was as though the darkness itself was unraveling and reweaving into a grotesque form. I quickly stood up. Curiosity and a slight fear piqued, despite a gnawing sense of dread. The figure moved slowly, undulating like a mirage. Its form was amorphous, never settling into a recognizable shape. It seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the very air around it felt charged with a sinister force. I instinctively took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. With each passing moment, the figure grew clearer, but more horrifying. It seemed to be composed of countless shadowy tendrils, writhing and twisting in a grotesque dance. The darkness was almost tangible, an oppressive force that seemed to suck in the light around it. In the field, once a serene landscape, had transformed into a stage for this otherworldly performance. I grabbed a flashlight from a nearby table and shone it towards the figure, but the beam seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. It was as if the light had no effect on it, an invisible wall repelling my attempt to pierce through the gloom. I stared even harder. Into the distance, the figure continued its slow, deliberate movement, making its way toward the house with an unnerving persistence. Fear began to slowly creep over me. As it approached, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath began to fog in front of me, and a chill ran down my spine. The figure grew ever closer, and its form was less formless, revealing what seemed to be a pair of glowing, malevolent eyes within the shifting mass. They were watching me, filled with a cold, inhuman intelligence that sent a jolt of terror through my core. The figure halted at the edge of the porch. I was glued to the spot, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It was as if the darkness was pressing against me, seeking to invade my very being. The eyes seemed to bore into my soul, probing for something that only they knew. I tried to move, but my legs were like lead. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help, but there was no signal. Panic rose within me as I realized I was utterly alone, cut off from any form of aid. The silence of the night was now filled with an eerie, almost palpable tension. The figure began to shift more violently, its form becoming more chaotic. The tendrils of darkness lashed out like restless spirits, and the air around it crackled with a supernatural energy. It felt as though reality itself was bending and warping in the presence of this malevolent entity. In a desperate attempt to break the spell that held me rooted to the spot, I grabbed a nearby iron rod from the porch. With trembling hands, I swung it toward the figure, hoping to drive it away. But as the rod made contact, it passed through the darkness as if it was nothing more than a mirage. The figure remained undeterred, its eyes still fixed on me with that chilling gaze. Suddenly, a distant, mournful wail echoed through the night, rising from the direction of an old well not far from the house. The sound was haunting, a lament that seemed to reverberate with centuries of sorrow and anguish. It was as if the well itself was crying out in despair. The figure, too, seemed to react, its tendrils twisting and contorting in response to the mournful cry. With a burst of adrenaline, I turned and sprinted towards the well, driven by a mix of terror and determination. The field seemed to stretch endlessly, and the darkness around me felt as though it was reaching out to ensnare me. The wail grew louder, a ghastly symphony of despair that threatened to consume my sanity. As I reached the well, I peered into its depths, hoping to find some explanation for the wailing. That well was ancient, its stone walls covered in creeping moss and ivy that seemed to shift and glow. The water within was black and murky, obscuring any view of the bottom. Shakily, I grabbed a nearby stone and threw it into the well, listening for the splash. But instead the wail intensified, echoing up from the depths. My skin began to prickle and my hair stood on end. Suddenly, I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and clammy. Spinning around, I found myself face to face with a shifting figure, his eyes glowing with fierce intensity, and the tendrils of darkness lashed out violently. I could feel its malevolence radiating toward me, a tangible force that threatened to overwhelm my senses. In a final act of desperation, I grabbed a bucket from beside the well and tossed it into the water. As it descended, the wail reached a deafening crescendo, and then, abruptly, it stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse, a profound and unsettling void that seemed to stretch endlessly. The figure, too, seemed to falter. Its form wavered and flickered, as if struggling to maintain its shape. I took the opportunity to retreat, stumbling back toward the house. The figure's presence seemed to weaken as I put distance between us, but its eyes remained fixed on me, filled with a cold, unspoken threat. I made it back to the porch, panting and disheveled. The night was still, the oppressive darkness receding slightly. I looked, and the figure had vanished, but the lingering sense of dread remained. I knew that whatever I had encountered was not something I was quickly going to forget. It was a presence that had lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. As dawn approached, I stood on the porch, watching the first light of morning chase away the darkness. The farm was eerily quiet, the fields bathed in a soft golden glow, but I knew that the terror that I had experienced that night was not going to be easily forgotten. The figure, whatever it was, had left its mark on me, and as the sun rose, I couldn't shake the feeling the nightmare was not over. The farm was no longer just a place of respite. It had become a battleground between light and darkness, a realm where shadows danced with a will of their own. And as I faced the new day, I was acutely aware that the true horror I had seen was not gone, but just not present. But in the knowledge that the darkness was still out there, waiting, watching, and ready to strike. The ghostly figure might have retreated for now, but its presence had awakened something deep within the farm. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next chapter in its dark history to unfold. As I stood there, the farm's enigmatic past intertwined with my own sense of reality. I couldn't help but wonder if I was destined to become a part of its haunting legacy.